Hi, this is Chris in California, and I want to talk real briefly about the origins of the Crusades. Because on my blog, someone had said something very interesting to me that I wanted to talk about, and particularly that the Crusades was a defensive war. And I'm kind of wondering how anyone could get to this notion if they knew really anything at all about the origin of the Crusades. I mean, various other things aside, the Crusades, or the impetus that would eventually lead to the Crusades, began in about 1071 when the Byzantine Empire, the Greeks, they were defeated at this battle called Manzikert in what is today eastern Turkey, and they lost what is today central Turkey to the Seljuk Turks. The Turks conquered. They conquered the interior, and the Greeks maintained control over a small strip of coastline all around Anatolia. They lost the center of Anatolia. And this obviously bothered the Byzantines quite a bit. But they had some political problems for a while. In particular, the emperor that had led to this disaster needed to be deposed, and so a competent emperor, a person by the name of Alexis I Comnenus, eventually came to power. And what he did was he wanted to conquer back the territory that the Greeks had lost 20 years before, and so he called to Europe to ask for mercenaries. That's what he wanted. There were a lot of fighters, soldiers, knights, that sort of thing, in Europe at the time, and they were creating a lot of problems for Europeans, and so Alexis was kind of like, hey, come over here and I'll put you in my army. And that's what he did mean, by the way. I will put you in my army, and we will reconquer central Anatolia, and I will give some of these knights territory in central Anatolia. That's kind of the deal he proposed at any rate. But there was, like I said, a lot of troubles in Europe at this time. This was pretty much the most fighty part of the Middle Ages in Europe, because the way that things were breaking down was there were more suns than there was land. All of Europe had been colonized, basically, by this time. And so you had these knights, these aristocrats, that have sons, that have more than one son. And they'd only give their property to one of their sons, and so they'd have like 2 or 3 other kids who didn't have anything to do. And the only thing they knew how to do was fight, because that's what knights did. They fought. And so they fought constantly, which is crazy. The church tried to maintain these no-killing days. They started off with 1, but then tried to open it up to 2 and then 3 to stop the knights literally running around the countryside, fighting in these petty little wars, because they had nothing better to do, and that's all they knew how to do, was fight, fight, fight. And so there were a lot of problems arising from the younger sons of aristocrats who would not inherit property, intriguing against their older brothers and their fathers in order to gain land, and to fighting each other to possess it, because right of conquest was acceptable way of getting land. So there was a lot of problems in Europe for this, because of this sort of thing. And it was a good idea to say, like, okay, take your excess aristocratic youth and send them over to me in Constantinople, and I'll put them in the army and we can fight some Turks and everybody will be happy. But that's not what happened. The Pope at the time, Urban II, he had some problems of his own, and one of them was that the papacy was being riven by internal dissent, and he was looking for a way to solidify his position. So at this place called Clermont in France, he had a council, and this is in 1095, where he said that Europeans should take up arms against the Turks, the Muslim or Muslim, he calls them several different things, in the Holy Land, and reconquer Jerusalem. Now, it's important to note here that Alexis Comnenus had no intention whatsoever of taking the battle to Palestine, much less Jerusalem. The Byzantine Greek Empire had not held possession of Jerusalem for over 400 years by this point. It was not something he was interested in. What Alexis was interested in was central Anatolia, which is today Turkey. He was looking to reconquer what they had lost 25 years earlier to the Turks in this battle. That's what his primary goal, not the Holy Land. He did not particularly care to conquer Jerusalem. But that's what Urban II said, though. And he furthermore spiced it up with these very apocryphal tales, lies, of what the Turks would do to people. Like, the stories would be like the Turks would nail a person to a stake and cut out their guts, and they feed them to the dogs while the person was still living. I mean, that kind of horror stories. They whip people up into a frenzy, into taking the cross and going to the Holy Land in order to defeat the Muslim and regain the Holy Land for God. And to do this, he did something that had serious repercussions, shall we say. He offered a plenary indulgence for people's sins. If you were to fight in this crusade against the infidel in order to regain the Holy Land, all of your sins would be wiped clear. The church had an infinite amount of good deeds that it could use to forgive people of anything. So it didn't matter what you had done or what you would do during the course of this crusade, it was all forgiven. It was okay. God was fine with you doing anything you wanted. And I'll actually tell you some of the things they did do in order to emphasize how seriously they took the notion that you can do anything. And this is not what Alexis wanted at all. And immediately, furthermore, the kind of European aristocrats start thinking to themselves, aha, I'm not anybody big here, but if I go there, I might be able to be king. Guys like Baldwin and Bohemond and other people, if you read about the subject more detailed, you will find all about them. And they were thinking about conquering part of the Holy Land in order to hold it as a private kingdom where they could be king. And so that was sort of the origin, and then, of course, the actual crusade happened. The origin was a call by Alexis Comnenus asking for mercenaries to regain central Anatolia, and it was misinterpreted by Urban as a way to solidify his power with noblemen who were thrilled to send their younger kids away to fight and die in some foreign land. If they get some territory there, whatever. At least they're not causing trouble in France and Italy and Germany and Spain and England. Great, just get them out. They were thrilled to do this. And as a result, it led to the Crusades themselves being what we think of them as being. And Alexis was horrified by the Crusades, by the way. He absolutely, did not want them. Okay, he didn't want Christian armies going to the Holy Land to stir up trouble. That's what he thought that it would be. It's just a hornet's nest of trouble. And he was right, by the way. He got them through Constantinople and Byzantine Empire as fast as humanly possible to send them on their quest, thinking that either they'll win, which he didn't actually think would happen, or they would be destroyed. And as it happened, the Turks were kind of in a bad state themselves. They were fighting several civil wars, and they weren't helping each other at all. The Crusaders were able to capitalize on this and actually retake Jerusalem, which created craziness in the area into this day. It is still just insane there, in part because of the political legacy of the Crusades and the violence between Christian and Muslim, which had reached a whole new level of weirdness at the time. But I said I'd tell you, one of the things that the Crusaders did, to see how far they took it. At one point, some Crusaders, this was during the siege of Jerusalem, they rode off into a town of about 4,000 people, and they conquered it because there was no wall, there were no soldiers there. They didn't really need to conquer it. But what they did with the population, about 4,000 people, is they put them in pots and boiled them and ate them. But that was okay because they had plenary indulgence for their sins. It doesn't matter what they did, God was good with it, including the murder and rape and then eventually cannibalism of all these people. And that's fact. But the notion, however, that the Crusades was defensive is insane. To the extent it was defensive for the Byzantine Greeks to regain territory they'd lost after the Battle of Menkaure. That was perhaps defensive. You might be able to justify that as being defensive. However, it was certainly not defensive for Frenchmen or Italians or Germans or Englishmen or Spaniards who participated in it. And furthermore, it wasn't even directed at the land that Alexis wanted, which was central Anatolia. They directed it at a completely different target, the Holy Land, which the Greeks had not ruled for 400 years. So I hope this explains why it wasn't a defensive war, and maybe inform some other people in an amusing fashion of some of the weirdness that went on in the time period. I really encourage people to read about the events that surround the First Crusade, and even more than the actual battles and stuff like that, which were kind of tedious. Just endurance tests. They walked across the desert sort of stuff. But the people and personalities that made up the Crusaders are fascinating, and I encourage anybody out there who's interested even slightly in the subject to find out about these really weird, wild, and fascinating guys. It will blow your mind.